The warning signal burst through the Galactic Council's massive communications center like a cry in the darkness. Static filled the air as the desperate message fought against space interference and the vast distance between stars. Council member Veltar, a tall alien with multiple arms, ending in tentacles, sat at his control station, reviewing routine reports from across the galaxy. When the emergency alert appeared on his screen, he barely looked up from his other work. His tentacle moved lazily across the control panel, ready to dismiss what he assumed was another pointless complaint from some remote world. The blinking red indicator meant nothing to him, just another interruption in his busy day of managing galactic affairs. "Oh, look at this," Veltar said with clear annoyance in his voice, speaking to his young assistant who stood nearby. Another group of humans somewhere crying about their problems. They probably saw some space rocks flying around and think it's the end of their world. The message had traveled an incredible distance from a place called the Kepler 442 system. This was where a small group of humans had built their new home just 20 years earlier. It was a tiny settlement on the edge of known space, so far away that most people in the galaxy had never even heard of it. To the powerful aliens who ran the Galactic Council, humans were basically nobody special, a young race that had only recently learned how to travel between stars. Most council members thought of humans as backward and weak. Their technology was simple compared to other species who had been exploring space for thousands of years. Humans had no real political power or influence in galactic affairs. Their few scattered colonies were like small dots on a map that stretched across the entire galaxy. Easy to ignore and seemingly unimportant. Ambassador Caprice, representing the powerful Altanian Republic, decided to take a closer look at the incoming message. His species was known for being more careful and thorough than others. He pulled up the transmission data on his computer system, trying to make sense of the broken signal that had traveled so far through space. The message was badly damaged by its long journey and interference from stars and cosmic radiation. Many parts were completely unreadable, filled with static and electronic noise. But some words came through clearly, and they painted a disturbing picture. The humans were saying they were under attack by unknown hostiles and desperately requesting immediate assistance. The computers showed that this emergency call had been sent 6 hours ago, meaning the situation might be even worse now. Junior Analyst Morden, a young alien who was still learning his job, looked worried as he read the message details. Unlike his superior, he felt that any call for help deserved at least some attention. "Sir, should we send out a patrol ship to check on them?" he asked, his voice showing genuine concern for the humans who might be in real danger. Veltar's answer came quickly and without any sympathy. He waved his tentacle dismissively, as if brushing away an annoying insect. "Those humans chose to live in that distant place, so whatever happens there is their own problem to solve. We have much more important things to worry about than watching over some primitive colonists who probably don't even know how to handle basic space threats." With that decision made, the emergency transmission was marked as low priority and sent to a digital filing system where it would likely never be seen again. The computer automatically sorted it, with thousands of other unimportant messages that arrived every day from across the galaxy, far away in the darkness of space. The Kepler 442 system continued sending out its desperate call for help, but now there was no one listening who cared enough to respond. Colony Administrator Park Jin climbed the metal stairs to the top of their emergency command center, which was really just a hastily built concrete bunker with communication equipment inside. As he reached the observation platform, the sight that greeted him was terrifying. The entire horizon glowed with orange and red flames, and thick black smoke rose into the alien sky. New Geneva, the peaceful mining colony that 50,000 people called home, had become a war zone. For 18 long days and nights, they had been fighting for their lives against an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. The constant sound of explosions had become so normal that people barely noticed anymore when another building was destroyed. Children who used to play in the colony's gardens now huddled in underground shelters with their parents, listening to the sounds of battle above their heads. Inside the command bunker, Communications Officer Kim Yuna sat at her desk, surrounded by glowing computer screens and radio equipment. Despite the terrible situation, her voice remained calm and professional as she delivered the latest bad news. "Sir, the eastern sector just went completely dark," she reported to Park Jin. "All our automatic defense systems there have been destroyed. That was our last line of protection on that side of the colony." As she spoke, another massive explosion shook the entire building. Dust fell from the ceiling, and some of the older equipment sparked and flickered, but Kim Yuna didn't even flinch. After more than 2 weeks of constant attacks, everyone had learned to keep working, no matter what was happening around them. The enemy they faced was unlike anything humans had ever encountered before. These creatures called themselves the Void Swarm, and they were like a nightmare come to life. Instead of being individual beings like humans, they all shared one massive mind that controlled every single creature in their fleet. They traveled through space in ships that looked more like giant living animals than machines, with surfaces that pulsed and moved like skin. What made them truly terrifying was their ability to learn and adapt. Every time the colonists tried a new defensive strategy, the Void Swarm would figure out how to counter it within hours. When humans used energy weapons, the creatures grew thicker armor. When they tried explosive attacks, the aliens developed ways to heal their wounds quickly. It was like fighting an enemy that became smarter and stronger after every battle. These monsters had a simple but horrible purpose. They consumed entire planets. They would arrive at a world, eat every living thing they could find, strip away all the useful materials, and then move on to their next target. Behind them, they left nothing but dead, empty rocks floating in space. Intelligence reports suggested they had already completely destroyed 2 other star systems before arriving at New Geneva. Chief Engineer Lee Day stood in front of the colony's main tactical display, a large screen that showed their remaining defenses and resources. The picture it painted was desperate. They had 50,000 people to protect: miners, farmers, teachers, doctors, and their families who had come here to build a new life far from Earth. Most of them had no military training and were depending on a handful of security officers and brave volunteers to keep them alive. For weapons, they had managed to convert 3 massive industrial mining lasers into defensive guns. These were powerful tools designed to cut through solid rock, but they were never meant to be used in combat. They also had a few small shuttles that were normally used for moving between the planet's surface and orbiting ships. The maintenance crews had attached mining explosives to these shuttles, turning them into makeshift bombers. Against this tiny force, the Void Swarm had brought hundreds of their bioships, each one the size of a city building and filled with warrior creatures that could adapt to any threat. Park Jin looked at his chief engineer with tired eyes that showed the strain of leading a hopeless fight. "How much longer can we hold them off?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer would be devastating. Lee Day studied the tactical display for a long moment before answering. His face was grim as he delivered what might be their final status report. "Maybe 6 hours, if everything goes perfectly. 8 hours, if we're incredibly lucky and they make some mistakes." Park Jin nodded slowly, understanding that their time was almost up. He walked over to the colony's most powerful communication system, designed to send messages across the vast distances between star systems. If they were all going to die defending their home, he wanted to make sure that Earth would know what happened to them and how bravely they had fought. In the early morning darkness above Earth, a desperate message pierced through the planet's protective satellite network like a knife cutting through silence. The digital clock on the orbital defense station showed 3:47 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time when the emergency signal arrived. carrying with it the hopes and fears of 50,000 people living on the edge of known space. This wasn't an ordinary diplomatic message sent through the usual government channels that connected Earth to other worlds. Instead, it traveled along a secret communication line used by private mining companies, a frequency that most official agencies never bothered to monitor. The people of New Geneva had deliberately chosen this path because they knew the normal channels had already failed them. Deep inside Earth's military headquarters, Admiral Choi Sang was sleeping peacefully in his private quarters when a sharp, urgent knocking at his door shattered the quiet night. As the commanding officer of humanity's sole defense fleet, he was used to being awakened for emergencies, but something in the sound of those knocks told him this was different from routine problems. Still wearing his sleeping clothes and with his hair messy from sleep, Admiral Sang stumbled to his personal computer terminal to read the decoded message that had just arrived from the far reaches of space. His aide stood nervously nearby, knowing that whatever was in that transmission was serious enough to wake the most important military commander in human space. The message itself was heartbreakingly simple, but every word hit Admiral Sang like a physical blow. The text read, "New Geneva under attack by unknown hostiles. Galactic Council refuses assistance. We have maybe hours left. Tell our families we tried. Administrator Park Jin, New Geneva Colony, Kepler 4 for Tibet." As Admiral Sang read these words, his hands began to shake uncontrollably. This wasn't just another military situation report. It was a goodbye letter from people who knew they were about to die. The mention of New Geneva brought back powerful memories that made his chest tighten with emotion. He had actually visited that colony during its grand opening ceremony several years earlier, when thousands of hopeful families had gathered to celebrate their new home among the stars. He remembered New Geneva as a beautiful, peaceful place where miners worked alongside farmers to build something special. Children played in carefully maintained gardens, while their parents worked to create a better future far from Earth's crowded cities. It was everything that humanity's expansion into space was supposed to represent: hope, courage, and the dream of new beginnings. But what made this message even more personal for Admiral Sang was the fact that his own nephew, his sister's eldest son, had been among the original colonists who had traveled to New Geneva to start a new life. The young man had been so excited about the opportunity to help build a mining operation on an alien world, full of dreams about the adventures he would have and the important work he would do. Within just a few minutes of reading the desperate plea for help, Admiral Sang was fully dressed and rushing through the corridors of the Fleet Command Center. His sleeping clothes had been replaced by his military uniform, and his face now showed the determined expression of a leader who had made a life-or-death decision. He immediately activated emergency protocols that hadn't been used in decades, not since the Titan Rebellion, when human colonies had fought for independence from Earth's control. These were the most serious military alerts in existence, designed for situations where the very survival of human civilization was at stake. The message that Admiral Sang sent out across all human communication networks was short, but carried enormous weight. Code Black, human colony under existential threat. All available assets respond immediately. These words traveled at the speed of light to every human world, every space station, every ship, and every military base scattered across dozens of star systems. The meaning was crystal clear to everyone who received it. Somewhere in the galaxy, fellow humans were facing complete destruction, and everyone who could help was being called to action. Throughout human space, from the oldest and most established worlds near Earth to the newest frontier settlements on the edge of known space, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Military commanders, ship captains, corporate executives, and ordinary citizens all understood the unspoken rule that had guided humanity since they first left Earth behind. No one gets left behind. No matter what the cost, no matter how dangerous the mission, no matter how far they have to travel to help. The rescue of New Geneva had begun. The first answer to Admiral Tsang's desperate call for help came from an unexpected source, the Proxima Centauri Mining Consortium, located in one of humanity's closest neighboring star systems. Captain Han Seo had been overseeing routine cargo operations when the code black alert reached his communication center. Without hesitation, he immediately began transforming his commercial fleet into an improvised war machine. Captain Han Seo's ships were never designed for combat. They were massive, slow-moving cargo haulers, built to transport heavy mining equipment and raw materials between planets. Their thick hulls were designed to protect valuable cargo from space debris, not enemy weapons. But within hours of receiving the emergency message, his engineering teams were working around the clock to convert these peaceful vessels into instruments of war. The most dramatic changes involved mounting huge industrial mining lasers onto the ship's outer hulls. These powerful tools were normally used to cut through solid rock and extract precious metals from asteroids. Now they would serve a very different purpose, cutting through enemy ships to save human lives. The engineering crews also reinforced the hulls with extra armor plating, turning the cargo haulers into flying fortresses that could absorb tremendous damage while delivering devastating firepower. Our estimated time of arrival at Kepler 442 is 16 hours. Captain Han Seo reported through the rapidly growing fleet coordination network that was connecting rescue ships from across human space. We're bringing 1,200 combat-ready personnel with us, plus enough food, medical supplies, and ammunition for extended military operations. His voice carried absolute determination as he continued. These ships might not be pretty, and they might not be fast, but they can carry enough firepower to level a small moon, if that's what it takes to save our people. Meanwhile, from the outer colonies scattered across the frontier, more unconventional vessels began joining the rescue mission. The agricultural world of Harmony contributed their pest control fleet, a collection of small, incredibly fast ships that were normally used to protect farming operations from dangerous space debris that could destroy entire crops. These nimble vessels carried military-grade chemical dispensers that were designed to neutralize biological threats to agriculture. But the ship captains quickly realized that the same chemicals that could kill harmful space organisms could be weaponized against the Void Swarm's biological ships. What had been tools of peaceful farming would become weapons of war. One of the most impressive contributions came from Captain Yang Hai, who commanded the security fleet protecting the massive Titan shipyards where humanity's most advanced warships were built. Her fleet included 3 prototype dreadnoughts, enormous warships that represented the cutting edge of human military technology. These ships were so new that they hadn't even finished their testing phase, with some systems still being fine-tuned by engineers. When the code black transmission reached the Titan shipyards, Captain Yang Hai faced a difficult decision. Military regulations clearly stated that untested warships should never be deployed in actual combat situations. The prototype dreadnoughts were worth billions of credits and represented years of advanced research and development. Taking them into battle before completing all safety tests was incredibly risky. But as Captain Yang Hai looked at the desperate message from New Geneva, her choice became crystal clear. She turned to her bridge crew, her voice filled with unwavering resolve, and said, "All the testing in the universe can wait. Those are our people out there fighting for their lives, and we're going to help them no matter what it takes." Within just 8 hours of Admiral Tsang's initial emergency broadcast, the response from human space was absolutely extraordinary. Over 800 different vessels had acknowledged the distress call and were changing course to converge on the Kepler 442 system. This included everything from massive military dreadnoughts and converted cargo ships to small private vessels whose owners had volunteered for the dangerous rescue mission. The galaxy had never witnessed such rapid and comprehensive military mobilization from any species in recorded history. Other alien civilizations typically took weeks or months to organize military responses, requiring endless committee meetings and diplomatic negotiations. But humanity had managed to assemble a massive rescue fleet in less time than it took most species to file the proper paperwork. The rescue fleet represented every aspect of human civilization working together toward a single goal. Corporate mining fleets sailed alongside military warships. Agricultural pest control vessels flew in formation with prototype dreadnoughts, private pleasure craft that had been hastily armed with whatever weapons their owners could find joined the mission alongside professional military units. Every single ship in the growing armada carried the same unspoken message that had guided humanity since they first ventured into space. Humanity protects its own, no matter the cost, no matter the distance, no matter the danger. Inside the massive Galactic Council monitoring station, Council sensor technician Plixon sat hunched over his glowing computer displays, watching something that made absolutely no sense. His job was to track ship movements across the galaxy, monitoring trade routes and military activities of all the different alien species. It was usually boring work. Most species moved their fleets slowly and predictably, following established patterns that rarely changed. But what he was seeing now completely defied everything he thought he knew about how civilizations operated. The tactical grid in front of him showed an incredible sight. Hundreds and hundreds of human ships were moving through space, from dozens of different star systems, all heading toward the same destination, the Kepler 442 system that contained the small human colony the Council had dismissed just hours earlier. Plixon rubbed his eyes and blinked several times, wondering if fatigue was making him see things that weren't really there. "This can't be accurate," he muttered to himself, his voice filled with confusion and disbelief. Something this unprecedented had to be a mistake in the sensor system or a malfunction in the computer networks. He immediately ran the entire sensor array through a complete diagnostic check, testing every component and recalibrating all the detection equipment. This process took nearly 20 minutes, during which time he hoped the impossible readings would disappear and return to normal. But when the diagnostic was complete, the results remained exactly the same. Nearly 1,000 human ships were racing through space toward the supposedly unimportant colony. The news quickly reached Ambassador Crix, who accessed the updated intelligence reports with growing alarm and amazement. What he discovered was even more shocking than the sheer number of ships involved. The humans weren't just sending their official military forces. This massive armada included corporate mining fleets, colonial defense squadrons, and even civilian vessels that had been hastily converted for combat operations. Most disturbing of all, the Council's extensive databases couldn't even identify some of the ship types that were joining the rescue mission. These were vessel classifications that had never been seen before, suggesting that humanity possessed military assets that they had kept completely hidden from galactic intelligence agencies. Senior Analyst the HFY, one of the Council's most experienced experts on military affairs, stared at the data in complete bewilderment. "How did they manage to mobilize so quickly?" he asked, his voice showing genuine confusion. "All of our intelligence reports suggested that humans had very limited capabilities for moving large fleets between star systems. We thought they could barely coordinate operations between their own colonies." The implications of what they were witnessing began to sink in throughout the Council chambers. Every major alien government had spent years studying humanity, trying to understand their capabilities and intentions as they spread across the galaxy. The official assessment had always been that humans were a minor power with primitive technology and poor organization. But the evidence now streaming across their sensors told a completely different story. The speed and scale of the human response suggested a level of coordination and military capability that no other species in the galaxy could match. Most alien civilizations would need weeks or months to organize such a massive fleet movement, requiring endless meetings, bureaucratic approvals, and diplomatic negotiations. Meanwhile, the Council member who had so casually dismissed the original distress call from New Geneva found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. He was now being called before the full Galactic Council to explain why he hadn't taken the human emergency more seriously. The political implications of his decision were becoming more serious by the hour. If humans could mount such an enormous military response to save a single threatened colony, what did that reveal about their true strategic capabilities? How many other human assets and abilities had the Council completely failed to detect? And most importantly, what would happen if this powerful species decided that the Galactic Council itself was a threat to human interests? Ambassador Crix, who had always been more cautious and thoughtful than his colleagues, spoke quietly, but his words carried enormous weight in the suddenly tense council chamber. Perhaps we should seriously reconsider our assessment of human strategic importance in galactic affairs, he suggested. Though everyone understood this was more than just a suggestion, it was a warning. The great council chamber, which usually buzzed with conversation and debate between dozens of different alien species, fell completely silent as every member contemplated the disturbing implications of what they had just learned. They had gravely underestimated an emerging power, and now they were watching that power demonstrate capabilities that none of them had imagined possible. The balance of power in the galaxy was shifting before their eyes, and they were helpless to stop it. The Void Swarm had been unstoppable for centuries, spreading across the galaxy like a plague that consumed everything in its path. Their collective hive mind controlled millions of biological creatures that worked together with perfect coordination, sharing every thought and experience instantly across vast distances. In their long history of conquest, they had completely destroyed 17 different worlds, each victory following exactly the same terrible pattern. First, they would arrive at a planet with overwhelming numbers, hundreds or thousands of their living bioships that moved through space like giant sea creatures swimming through an ocean of stars. These weren't mechanical vessels built in factories, but actual living beings that could grow, heal, and change their shape based on whatever threats they encountered. Next came their terrifying ability to adapt to any weapon or defense that their enemies used against them. If a species tried to fight them with energy weapons, the swarm's creatures would quickly grow thicker, more resistant skin. If enemies used explosive weapons, the bioships would develop the ability to heal their wounds within minutes. No matter what defensive strategy a civilization tried, the Void Swarm would learn to counter it and become even stronger. Finally, once all resistance was crushed, they would systematically consume every living thing on the planet, plants, animals, and intelligent beings alike. They would strip away all useful materials, leaving behind nothing but a dead, empty rock floating in space. It was complete and total destruction, erasing entire civilizations, as if they had never existed. The small, human colony on New Geneva should have been just another easy victory, conquered within a few days at most. The swarm's hive mind calculated that 50,000 primitive humans with basic mining equipment would pose no real threat to their advanced biological warfare capabilities. But from the very first day of the attack, something was different. These humans refused to follow the expected pattern of panic, surrender, and destruction. Instead, they fought back with a desperate creativity that the swarm had never encountered before. When their few military weapons were destroyed, the colonists immediately began converting their peaceful mining equipment into improvised weapons systems. Massive industrial drills designed to bore through solid rock became weapons for attacking the bioships' soft undersides. Construction vehicles were transformed into mobile artillery platforms. Even agricultural equipment was modified to spray chemicals that could damage the swarm's organic armor. The humans seemed to have an endless ability to turn anything around them into a tool for fighting back. When the swarm's creatures breached the colony's outer defenses, the humans didn't collapse in defeat as other species had done. Instead, they fell back to carefully prepared secondary positions and continued fighting with the same fierce determination. Every building, every tunnel, Every piece of ground was defended, as if the entire future of humanity depended on it. The first wave of human reinforcements arrived at the exact moment when New Geneva's final defensive perimeter was collapsing under the relentless swarm assault. Captain Han Seo's mining fleet dropped out of hyperspace directly above the burning colony, their converted cargo haulers immediately launching into combat against the bioships that had been terrorizing the colonists for weeks. All vessels, weapons free, Captain Han Seo commanded over the communication network, his voice filled with cold determination. Show these creatures exactly what happens when they make the mistake of threatening human lives. The massive mining lasers that had been hastily mounted on the cargo ships proved to be devastatingly effective weapons against the swarm's organic armor. These industrial tools were designed to carve through the hardest rock and metal found in asteroid belts, concentrating enormous amounts of energy into precise beams that could cut through almost anything. The swarm's bioships, which had adapted perfectly to defend against the colony's smaller defensive weapons, suddenly found themselves facing entirely new threats that they had no protection against. The mining lasers sliced through their organic hulls with surgical precision, causing massive damage that their healing abilities couldn't repair fast enough. What confused and frustrated the Void Swarm's collective intelligence most was the humans' incredible tactical flexibility. Unlike other species that fought in predictable, organized formations, each human ship seemed to operate independently while somehow maintaining perfect coordination with the rest of the fleet. They adapted to changing battlefield conditions faster than the swarm could analyze and respond to their strategies. The human captains seemed to anticipate every biological adaptation that the swarm attempted, countering each new defense almost immediately with a different type of attack. When the bioships grew thicker armor, the humans switched to different weapons. When the creatures tried to heal their wounds, the mining fleet targeted their healing organs specifically. For the first time in their long expansion across the galaxy, the Void Swarm encountered an enemy that not only fought back with equal ferocity, but actually seemed to be more innovative and adaptable than they were. The hunters had become the hunted, and they didn't know how to handle this terrifying new experience. The space around New Geneva suddenly filled with brilliant flashes of light as Admiral Choi Sang's massive flagship, the battlecruiser Inchen, dropped out of hyperspace along with the main human rescue fleet. The Inchen was one of humanity's most powerful warships, bristling with advanced weapons and carrying enough firepower to level entire cities. But even this mighty vessel seemed small compared to the massive armada that followed it into the battle zone. As Admiral Sang stood on his command bridge, looking at the tactical displays, what he saw filled him with a cold, burning rage that seemed to freeze his blood while simultaneously setting his heart on fire. The orbital space around the peaceful colony was littered with the twisted wreckage of destroyed ships, both human vessels that had fought bravely to defend the colonists, and the grotesque remains of Void Swarm bioships that had been torn apart in the fierce fighting. Pieces of metal, organic matter, and other debris floated silently through space, like a graveyard of broken dreams. Some of the wreckage still glowed with residual heat from weapons fire, while other pieces spun slowly in the darkness, telling the story of a desperate battle that had raged for hours before the main fleet arrived. Communications Officer Parkman, seated at her control station surrounded by glowing screens and communication equipment, delivered her status report with professional calm, despite the chaos visible outside the ship's windows. Admiral, we're receiving distress signals from 17 different human ships that are damaged and need immediate assistance. The colony itself is still intact and fighting, but just barely holding on. Admiral Sang studied the three-dimensional battle projection that showed the positions of every ship and structure in the system. The holographic display revealed that the Void Swarm had committed nearly 200 of their bioships to this attack, a massive force that should have been more than enough to completely destroy the small mining colony within hours. But instead of achieving a quick victory as they had expected, The swarm found themselves trapped in a grinding, exhausting battle of attrition against an enemy that absolutely refused to surrender or retreat. The human colonists and their initial reinforcements had fought with such desperate determination that they had managed to hold their ground against impossible odds. Admiral Tsang's voice carried across the communication network to every ship captain in the rescue fleet, his words cold and precise like steel cutting through ice. All fleet commanders, this is Admiral Tsang. I want everyone to understand our mission clearly. We're not here simply to drive these creatures away from our colony. We're here to make absolutely certain they never, ever threaten human lives again. The human fleet's response to this order was systematic, coordinated, and completely merciless. While specialized rescue ships moved carefully through the debris field to evacuate wounded colonists and retrieve survivors from damaged vessels, the combat ships began a methodical hunt for every single Void Swarm bioship remaining in the system. Captain Yang Hai's prototype dreadnoughts, the experimental warships that had never been tested in actual combat, proved to be devastatingly effective against the swarm's organic vessels. Their advanced experimental weapon systems tore through the enemy formations like sharp knives cutting through delicate tissue paper, destroying bioships that had seemed nearly invulnerable just hours earlier. The swarm's creatures, sensing that the battle had turned decisively against them, attempted to retreat and escape to fight another day. But when they tried to flee toward the edge of the star system, where they could jump to hyperspace, they made a terrifying discovery. Human ships had already anticipated their escape routes and jumped ahead. To block every possible exit vector, Captain Kim Tae commanded a squadron of fast attack craft that harassed the fleeing swarm vessels like wolves pursuing wounded prey. These smaller, more maneuverable ships darted in and out of the enemy formations, delivering precise strikes that crippled the bioship's ability to escape, while the heavier human warships moved into position to completely cut off all escape routes. The Void Swarm found themselves trapped in a carefully planned ambush with no way out. Every direction they turned, more human ships appeared to block their path. The hunters who had terrorized the galaxy for centuries suddenly found themselves being hunted with the same ruthless efficiency they had once used against their own victims. Admiral Tsang's final order was delivered with the cold certainty of absolute judgment. No survivors. These creatures made this personal the moment they decided to attack our people and threaten our families. What followed was not a battle, but a systematic extermination. Every single swarm vessel in the system was tracked down, cornered, and completely destroyed. The human fleet showed no mercy and accepted no surrender, treating the bioships like the dangerous predators they were. Their biological debris was scattered across space as a warning to any other species that might consider threatening human colonies in the future. The news of humanity's incredible rescue missions spread across the galaxy like wildfire, moving through communication networks faster than any government could control or contain it. Within just a few days, every major alien civilization knew the complete story of how humans had mobilized over 1,000 ships to save a single threatened colony, and then systematically destroyed the entire Void Swarm presence in the region. This wasn't the kind of information that governments could keep secret or suppress through diplomatic channels. Ordinary citizens, traders, journalists, and military officers from hundreds of different species were sharing the story through personal communications, social networks, and unofficial news sources. The tale of humanity's response had become the most talked about event in galactic politics. Ambassador Crix, who had always tried to maintain good relationships with different species, suddenly found his communication systems overwhelmed with emergency calls from governments across the galaxy. His office, which usually handled routine diplomatic matters like trade disputes and border negotiations, was now receiving urgent messages from the highest levels of alien governments, the same species leaders who had dismissed humans as primitive. Newcomers just days earlier were now desperately seeking detailed information about human military capabilities, strategic intentions, and future plans. They wanted to know everything. How many ships did humanity really possess? How quickly could they mobilize their forces? And, most importantly, what were their intentions toward other galactic powers? Intelligence Director Quindel of the powerful Altanian Republic delivered a briefing to his government's high command that sent shockwaves through their leadership. The humans mobilized over 1,000 ships to save 50,000 colonists, he reported, his voice filled with amazement and concern. That means they deployed 20 ships for every single civilian they were trying to protect. The implications of this ratio were staggering to alien minds. Most galactic civilizations considered a 1-to-1 ratio of military assets to civilians to be extremely generous during rescue operations. Even the most militaristic species rarely deployed more than 5 ships per 1,000 civilians in emergency situations, and usually only when the threatened population included important political or military leaders. But humanity had demonstrated something unprecedented. They were willing to risk enormous military resources to save ordinary civilians, including miners, farmers, teachers, and children who had no special political or strategic importance. This suggested a level of commitment to protecting their own people that no other species had ever displayed. The economic implications were equally shocking to governments that were used to careful cost-benefit analyses before committing resources to military operations. Human corporations had voluntarily contributed their most valuable assets to the rescue mission, effectively subsidizing a massive military operation for purely humanitarian purposes. Mining companies had donated their cargo fleets, agricultural worlds had provided their pest control vessels, and shipbuilding corporations had committed prototype warships that were worth billions of credits. All of this had been organized and coordinated within hours, without any government forcing participation or offering financial compensation. This level of voluntary cooperation between government, military, and civilian organizations suggested a degree of species unity that other civilizations found both admirable and deeply terrifying. Most alien societies struggled with internal conflicts, competing interests, and bureaucratic delays that made rapid military responses nearly impossible. Several smaller species, who had been quietly worried about threats like the Void Swarm, but lacked the military power to defend themselves, began secretly reaching out to human diplomatic missions. They were seeking defense agreements, mutual protection treaties, and expanded trade partnerships with this newly revealed galactic power. If humanity could eliminate the Void Swarm threat so completely and decisively, they reasoned, then forming alliances with humans might provide protection against other dangerous predator species that threaten peaceful civilizations throughout the galaxy. The leaders of these smaller nations sent carefully worded messages to human ambassadors, expressing interest in closer relationships and offering various forms of cooperation. Some offered rare resources, others provided strategic locations for human colonies, and several proposed joint research projects that could benefit both species. Even some of the larger, more established galactic powers began quietly reassessing their relationships with humanity. Species that had previously ignored human diplomatic overtures were now instructing their ambassadors to explore opportunities for cooperation and friendship. The balance of power in the galaxy, which had remained relatively stable for centuries, had shifted dramatically overnight. What had been a minor species on the periphery of galactic politics had suddenly revealed itself to be a major power with capabilities that rivaled or exceeded those of the most established civilizations. Everyone in the galaxy understood that the political landscape had changed forever, and they were all scrambling to figure out how to adapt to this new reality where humanity was no longer a species that could be safely ignored or dismissed. 3 weeks had passed since the dramatic rescue of New Geneva, and the great galactic Council chamber looked very different from the last time it had discussed human affairs. The massive circular room, with its towering walls and advanced holographic displays, was packed with representatives from every major species in the galaxy. Today's emergency session had drawn the largest attendance in decades, as everyone wanted to witness this historic moment. Admiral Choi Sang walked slowly down the central aisle toward the speaker's platform, his military uniform crisp, and his bearing dignified but not arrogant. The same chamber that had casually dismissed his people's desperate cry for help, just weeks earlier, was now hosting a very different kind of conversation. Every alien eye in the room followed his movement, and the usual chatter and side conversations had fallen completely silent. Council leader Veltar, the same official who had so carelessly dismissed the original distress call from New Geneva, now struggled to find the right words to address the human admiral. His previous attitude of casual dismissiveness had been completely replaced by cautious respect tinged with obvious nervousness. The human response to the crisis was quite impressive, Veltar admitted, his voice carefully controlled as he tried to maintain his dignity while acknowledging his previous mistake. Perhaps we seriously underestimated your species' military capabilities and organizational efficiency. Admiral Sang's response was carefully measured, but every word carried the weight of absolute conviction. He spoke clearly and firmly, ensuring that every representative in the chamber could hear and understand his message perfectly. You dismissed 50,000 human lives as completely unimportant, Sang began, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. In the exact same amount of time it took your council to file our emergency distress call under low priority and forget about it. We mobilized the largest rescue fleet in recorded galactic history. He activated the chamber's central holographic display system, filling the air above the assembled representatives with a stunning three-dimensional presentation that showed the complete scope of humanity's response to the crisis. The display revealed detailed information that left many council members speechless with amazement. The hologram showed 1,247 individual vessels that had participated in the rescue mission, each one represented by a small glowing symbol that indicated its origin, capabilities, and role in the operation. These ships had come from 43 different human worlds, scattered across multiple star systems, representing every major human corporation, every colonial government, and every military organization in human space. The coordination was absolutely flawless, Admiral Sang continued, gesturing toward the display. The commitment was total and absolute. Every human who could contribute to the rescue did so without hesitation, without being forced, and without expecting any reward, except the knowledge that they had helped save fellow humans. The Admiral's next words carried a warning that resonated throughout the chamber. We want to make something perfectly clear to everyone here. Humanity is not interested in galactic politics, territorial expansion, or building an empire. We don't want to conquer other worlds or impose our will on other species. He paused, letting this reassurance sink in before delivering the message that would define humanity's relationship with the galaxy going forward. But we want every single species in this council to understand something fundamental about humanity that you clearly didn't know before. We protect our own people, no matter what. Attack any human colony anywhere in the galaxy. Threaten any human life regardless of how insignificant you think they are. And you will face every ship, every world, and every human being in existence. The silence that followed these words was so complete that it seemed to have physical weight. Species representatives who had previously considered humans to be insignificant newcomers now understood that they had encountered something completely unprecedented in galactic history, a civilization that would mobilize its entire strength to protect even a single threatened community. Ambassador Crix, who had always been more thoughtful and diplomatic than his colleagues, finally broke the silence by asking the question that was on everyone's mind. What exactly do you want from us and from this council? Admiral Sang's answer was remarkably simple, but it carried implications that would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. We want recognition that human lives matter just as much as the lives of any other species. The next time we send out a call for help, we expect a response that matches the seriousness of the threat. Because if you won't protect our people when they're in danger, we've just proven that we'll do it ourselves, completely, decisively, and without any mercy for those who threaten us. As the session concluded and representatives began filing out of the chamber, every council member understood that they had just witnessed a pivotal moment in galactic history. The galaxy's newest major power had announced itself not through conquest, intimidation, or territorial expansion, but through an unprecedented act of absolute loyalty to its own people. The humans had kept their most sacred promise, and now everyone knew it. No one gets left behind.